All right, but it's not to say that every segment at a fundamental level within the market or every sector is looking bad, particularly if you've been looking through the earnings. I think if the FMCG sector does seem to stand out in some ways because they haven't seen the kind of pressures that people were fearing. We've lived with a high inflation environment for a while now. The fear was that would dent volume growth. We feared that pricing power would actually not be in the hands of FMCG companies, but this time's earnings seem to have negated a large number of those views. So what's moving on the FMCG sector? What's keeping things going and keeping things relatively strong? Joining us, Mr. A. Mahendran, MD of Godrej Consumer Products Limited, and we're also getting a market perspective with Costa Pavaskar from Sharekhan. But I'm going to start with Mr. Mahendran. Mr. Mahendran, good afternoon, sir. Thank you so much for joining us. You know, we've seen the numbers that you've posted. We've seen the numbers that some of your other FMCG competitors and peers have posted. But the one thing that seems to stand out is that we haven't seen the kind of drop in volume growth that people were fearing. We haven't seen margin contraction that people were fearing. So in some ways, things are looking better than people feared. Can you help us understand why?
See, as I've been repeatedly informing your channel, particularly the last 1 year, as FMCG sector is one sector which is fairly insulated from many pitfalls or downfalls at a macroeconomic level. As you said rightly, we have posted very good results for the quarter. And FMCG sectoral growth rate for the year ended up with about 10%, 10 to 11%. And for the quarter, it's ending up at 15% level. Now, I do not see much of impact again for the next year or for the next quarter. And whatever our sales are concerned, our feedback both at the urban as well as the rural level, we are posting good results in terms of consumption.
What's the reason behind it, Mr. Mahendran, if I can stay with you? Because, you know, in the past, and I'm sure you've seen many cycles where high inflation has had substantial negative impact on the FMCG sector. Is it just about wage growth? Is it about, you know, the market expanding? What's the story that's helping us keep the FMCG sector sort of above, you know, earlier negatives that we've been talked about?
Yeah, as FMCG does have an impact on the inflationary situation. But as you would know that inflation is fairly at 7-8% level now, and we don't expect that to even go up for the next year. So that's one. But the governmental spending, which also helps a lot in the rural sector from a disposable income for the rural households, also helps the consumption of FMCG per se. So I think the players also, the number of players in the FMCG sector, how much efficient they are and how aggressive they are in the last year as well as years to come, I think the players also should be given enough credit for doing a good job.
Let me actually bring in Kaustubh on that note. Kaustubh, what has been your read into you know, the big FMCG players, their numbers, particularly on the volume side? Are you pleasantly surprised? And then on the back of this year's performance, what are you anticipating for next year?
See, I'm not surprised, but yeah, the company has maintained their volume growth momentum. And for past 3 quarters, despite of the inflationary pressures, we have seen that volume growth momentum has maintained. And the key drivers to the volume growth is, in fact, as Mr. Mahendran indicated, that rural growth has been pretty strong. And secondly, most of the companies have brought a lot of innovations in their portfolio. Also, the companies have also entered into some of the categories where penetration is low. So, you know, companies are trying to drive growth through the categories where the penetration are low. They are trying to get into categories where growth rates are more than 20 to 25%. So this is basically helping them to, you know, post the good volume growth in past 3 to 4 quarters.
Mr. Mahendran, within, say, your portfolio, which are the categories which are clearly outperforming? Which are the markets which you would be looking at to continue driving this growth in the next year, 2 years or so?
We have 3 categories. One is personal wash, as well as household insecticide and the hair color. The 3 categories we focus on. And certainly the 2 categories, which is personal wash and household insecticide, is growing much ahead of the category growth. We are posting at a level of 30% value growth, and the volume is roughly about 17-18% volume growth we are posting on these two categories. Hair color is not responding to that kind of high growth, but it is hovering around 10 to 13% growth in hair color. But way forward, we expect these two categories to continue to give us good results, both personal wash as well as household insecticide. But hair color should also trigger to a higher growth for the next year.
Mr. Mahendran, the other thing that we'd seen in the FMCG sector, and I'll get Kaustubh's view on this as well, but we'd seen a fair amount of overseas acquisition tendency that had come through. I'm wondering if those overseas acquisitions broadly at a sectoral level, specifically maybe for you, have they paid off, and is that something that you see as a trend building up in the next year or so as well? Do overseas markets still hold a lot of importance right now, or expanding into overseas markets still hold a lot of importance for you?
Yeah, I think next year our focus is going to be organic growth in the FMCG business, which we have acquired in the emerging markets in Latin America, Africa and Indonesia. And our feedback and our opinion is that the FMCG sector in these emerging markets is growing very well. The consumption is pretty good. And our acquired companies are doing very well as far as last year is concerned. We expect them to do well in the next year.
Kaustubh, last word to you. The overseas acquisitions, whether they're paying off domestically, where are the markets, high growth markets, and then accordingly, which are the high growth stocks in the FMCG space according to you?
See, yeah, acquisitions are actually adding on to the top line of the companies like GCPL, Marico. If you see, in the past they have done, in the recent past they have done the acquisitions, which is adding on to their top line. And as Mr. Mahendran has indicated, that Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia, these are the emerging markets where the consumption is improving. Also in the categories, the penetration is also improving, so which is helping these companies to gain around 20% growth. And I believe that this 20% growth in terms of top line is sustainable in the coming years. So in terms of, if you ask me stock specific, I would suggest that Godrej Consumer Products Limited and stocks like ITC or stocks like GlaxoSmithKline Consumers are better stocks in the current perspective, because you have to look at the valuations also. And in the recent months, the valuations have, especially of the FMCG companies, have shot up. So from valuation perspective also, you have to look at the stocks. But from longer term perspective, I believe that sector has good prospect going ahead.
Right, Mr. Mahendran, Kaustubh, thank you so much for joining us. It's good to hear that things are looking relatively rosy for the FMCG sector. There's a reason, I guess, it's called defensive, and it's certainly acting and playing out as a defensive in this otherwise nervous market, low growth kind of market. Let's go in for a quick break. We'll come back.